Hello, welcome to Thein Podcast. I'm Atet. This week, Thein met with the British ambassador Andrew Patrick, who is due to step down from his role in May. One of the country's most well-known diplomats, Mr. Patrick has witnessed Myanmar highs and lows during his time as ambassador over the last 5 years. From the last day of the Thein Sein government, the historic elections of 2015 and the country's first tentative steps towards democracy to the despair of the recent troubles in Rakhine, he has had a front row seat for it all. This is what he had to say. Sitting in his office inside the British embassy in Rangoon, we asked Mr. Patrick if thinks Myanmar is in a better place than it was when he first started his role in 2013.
Yes, I do. Yes, I think obviously some things are better, some things are worse, but overall I would say things are better. There's more freedom, people are able to express themselves, freedom of the media, fewer political prisoners, all of those things are important. Obviously, the situation in Rakhine is a lot more difficult than it was 5 years ago. But overall, I'd probably say things, for most people in the country, are better.
Mr. Patrick said he believes attitude toward human rights are changing in Myanmar, but it will take many years and better education for people will begin to understand more.
Well, I think it's not surprising that views of human rights in Myanmar are different from the views of human rights in other countries. You've had this very unique history, very difficult history for many decades. And the main thing is that during that time the education system was very badly affected. So I think everyone agrees that Myanmar education system is not as good as it should be. So I think one of the things that I hope will change when people become better educated is that people will understand different views about human rights, and the view of human rights here will become a bit more similar to the view of human rights in Europe or America. But I think people understand some of this very well, and talking to people, they understand the fundamentals of democracy, they understand why the changes that have happened are good. I think obviously there are some issues about race, the role of ethnic identity in a modern society, where the views in this country are probably very different from what they would be in the UK or France or the United States. So there is some way to go, but a lot has changed over the last 5 years, and I hope, as I say, as people get better educated over the next 10, 20 years, we will see views changing on this.
And he believes more work must be done to improve the rights of the women in Myanmar.
Well, I think a lot can be done. I mean, Myanmar is not the worst country for women's rights in the region, but obviously there are many problems. And I think a greater recognition and public discussion of those problems will be important. I think the legislation that's still being discussed in Parliament, protection of violence against women law, that's going to be very important too. But legislation is not the main thing which changes behaviour. It's a sort of cultural change. Certain things become unacceptable, which were acceptable in the past. And we've seen that in the UK. There are certain ways of behaving that, say, in the 1960s, people would have behaved in a certain way. Now, 60 years later, 50 years later, people wouldn't do that anymore. They realise it's wrong. We've been working particularly on the issue of sexual violence in conflict, which is a very major problem here. It's a major problem on all sides. There's no army, there's no ethnic army which is completely free of this problem. It happens, and indeed it happens in conflicts in which the British Army is involved as well. The point is that you have to openly investigate when these things happen, and you have to bring the people who perpetrate them to justice. And we haven't seen that much progress on that issue yet. We've seen some people in the Myanmar army who have been prosecuted, but there are still a lot of reports of cases where we don't hear what happens. The Myanmar army says that it's investigating them, but you never really hear about what happens. You don't hear the result of the investigation. You don't. Independent observers, for example, are not allowed to sit in the court-martial hearing and see what happens to the accused. And those kind of things, if there could be a bit more openness about that process, I think that would be one step that would change things. But there are lots of other issues on which women's rights could be improved, but I just mentioned that one.